Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I am Inessa and I am an indie author from Toronto, Canada, and I publish under the pen name A.N. Sage. If you were here last week, then you know that we're in the middle of our plotting series. I'm super excited about this. I'm a huge plotter. And so if you haven't watched last week's video, it's kind of an introduction. We talked about some tools that you need before you start plotting your novel. If you haven't plotted before and you're new to plotting, it'd be a good place to start. So make sure that you check that video out. If you're new here, welcome. In this channel, I kind of talk about my journey as an author, as an indie author. I have been an indie author for many, many years now. And so I picked up some tips and tricks along the way that I figured I would share with you. We also talk about behind the scenes of being an author, planning, because I'm a planner junkie, and a whole bunch of other things that I think are fun that you might find interesting. So if you're not subscribed, make sure to subscribe and don't miss out on any videos. And now into the plotting series, the continuation of it. So I know that last week I said that we're going to talk about Act 1, but I actually thought of one more video that we should talk about, one more part we should add to the series, because it is an important part of plotting a novel. And so I thought we could have kind of like a shorter video today and squeeze that in there. And then next week we'll move into Act 1 and then Act 2, Act 3, and then the wrap up. So hopefully you guys are okay with that. But I didn't want to skip over this part because it is pretty important. And that part is characters. So before you kind of figure out your scenes, you obviously need to have an idea of who your characters are. These are the people that your readers are kind of tuning in to find out more about. These, your characters are the tools that you will use to form a connection with your readers. And so you could have the most interesting, most kind of engaging plot, but if your characters fall flat, then your reader will not connect with them and then that plot will not matter. And so it's very important to have your characters figured out before you sit down to plot your actual novel. And so what you kind of will need to do that, it's like almost like another tools, but not really video, is you'll need some character notes. You'll need to figure out who your character is. You might have a name in place. You might kind of picture them in your head, but you need to kind of sit down and write down some things about your character just off the top of your head. Like, who is your main character? What is it about them that you really enjoy? Why do you want to write about them? Almost journal about your main character, like they're a person that you know in real life. I find this exercise to be very useful. I do this for all my main characters where I kind of talk about them, like there's somebody I just met at a party, at a coffee shop, whatever, through a friend, right? Or on the subway. I just think about them as this new person I met, and I sit down and I write about that person. What was my first impression of them? How did they behave? What were they wearing? Did they have any mannerisms or tics or anything that I picked up on when I met them? What do I think that said about them? Just kind of like a rough idea of who your character is. And I find that having like a 1 or 2 page kind of journal about that character is really helpful in getting to know them. And if the more you know your character, the more your readers will want to know your character, right? It will come off on the page when you're writing. And so it's important to get those initial notes of your character down so that you can start diving even deeper into who they are as we move along. So now that you have those notes, once you've journaled and you've gotten that out of your head, you want to kind of get some character inspirations. This is a really fun part. A lot of people call this casting a character, right? And so you kind of want to go out there and you want to think of it this way. If somebody was to play my character in a movie, who would it be? It doesn't have to be an actual like actor. It can be like a Pinterest picture or Google picture, a model, somebody from your own life, right? Like, which I don't know if I would always recommend that because it would be hard to then separate your characters from these real life people. But hey, if that's what works for you, you got to do that. But you want to have some kind of visual inspiration or at least I always do, of who your character is. Because when you're writing about them, there's a couple of reasons of why this could be useful. So one reason is it's nice to have an image in your head of when you're writing dialogue, right? Because you can see their facial expressions better. You can see their mannerisms, like what they do, how they move their body better. It's also really useful for if you have any kind of action scenes, because if you have an image of this character in your head already, you can see what they can do, what the limitations of their bodies are, how they would move their bodies, right? Like if it's like maybe they are not fast runners, maybe they have a limp, like just things like that, right? Like maybe they're like bottom heavy, top heavy, whoever they are, it will impact how they move, and how they move will make it easier for you to write them into a scene later, because they will develop certain things, like just like any other person would. Like I have, let's say, I have asthma, right? And so I don't know why, but I have asthma, and that's a real thing. And so how I move is different from somebody who doesn't have asthma. I don't run for as often, right? And so there's like a fight scene or the world was ending. Chances are I'd be the person who is not like running fast from, scary aliens invading us or something. I'd be hiding somewhere, like just things like that. And that's a very normal thing for people to have. And so your character is a person, or a person related maybe, but they should have mannerisms that develop from their physical state. And so having this like physical idea of who your character is very useful, I find. You also want to think about your character's inner layer. So this is all in the resource library as well, that you can download for free. And your character's inner layer is basically who they are on the inside, their personalities, how they behave themselves, what their past is, what their wounds are, how they portray themselves to others, like all of that really juicy, good stuff. There's a questionnaire that I've provided to you guys that you just kind of fill out. And when you're done, you'll see that you will know your character so much better, and you might even have parts of the story developing because you know your character better. You also want to think about your secondary characters, right? So not just your protagonist. You want to think about everybody else who's going to be there. Make some notes about them, cast them as well. If you want to do like a more kind of limited inner layer of them, it could be very helpful as well. You don't want your secondary characters when you're writing, or just in general, to come off as props, right? They're people. They're not just there, and they should never be there to just forward a protagonist, right? They're people on their own, and on the page that should read as somebody that, like, if the protagonist wasn't there and all of a sudden we were to jump into your secondary character's head, then we should feel like we know them and they have enough meat to their personality to carry their own story. Obviously, you're not going to do that with if your character passes somebody on the street randomly and they never see them again, you don't need to go through all this trouble for them unless they're important, right? But if it's somebody that's in your character's life and that the reader is going to get to know more and more, then you really want to do the same, or at least similar kind of phases of development for them. And then the last thing you really want to think about is your antagonist. Now, your antagonist is as important. If your antagonist is a person, because we're talking about people, if your antagonist is not a person, you need to develop that as well. Like if it's like a war, if it's like a political system and stuff, there's different ways to develop that, but we're talking about people, right? And so you want to think about your antagonist as well. And you want to think of them in as much detail as you do as your protagonist. So your antagonist should get like a full inner layer development. You should think about like their arcs and everything. Anything you would do for your protagonist, you should turn around and do for your antagonist. And we're going to talk more about character arcs because your antagonist will have a negative arc than your protagonist will. But we're going to talk about that more in kind of the wrap up. But your antagonist should be just as developed as your protagonist is. So it's very important to have these two yin and yangs of your book taken care of, and then anything in between, which are all your secondary characters. So before you start plotting, I highly suggest you kind of sit down and you think about all the characters in your book, make a list of them, think them through, journal about them, figure out who they are as people, why they're there, why they're important, what's important to them in their lives, and kind of have this like idea already in place. It doesn't have to be on paper. If it's on paper, great. If that helps you, everything I do is on paper, but it could be in your head, it could be on the computer, it could be notes on your phone, Post-it notes, whatever. As long as you kind of have an idea of your characters in mind, like these are going to be your friends for a long time while you're writing the book. So you might as well really know them. So that's all I have for this week's video. It was a short one, like I said, but I think that it's an important one, and it's an important step to take before we move on to the next stage of plotting, which is Act 1, the exciting beginning of your book, Act 1. So we're going to get to that next week. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you aren't already, and stick around for next week for another plotting series video. And as always, stay magical, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.